Have you ever seen the movie Bad?
Oh, the Indian film, right, with the rain and the incredible
Yeah,
atmosphere.
exactly, that one. It's this incredibly atmospheric, visually stunning film, and it revolves around a premise that it really sticks in your brain long after the credits roll.
It really does. It has that mythological weight to it.
Right. So, for those of you listening who haven't seen it, it's about a cursed treasure. There's this mythological entity, a goddess of prosperity, and she has a greedy son named Hastar.
And he's just consumed by boundless, uncontrollable greed.
Exactly. Because of that greed, the goddess actually curses him and imprisons him in her own womb. But the human protagonist of the film, a guy named Vinayak, he figures out a way to exploit this.
Like they always do.
Like they always do. He realizes he can steal gold from Hastar's cursed pouch by distracting him with little dough dolls. But here is the terrifying catch, the ultimate risk.
The curse.
Yeah, the curse. If Hastar even grazes you, if he so much as touches you with a single finger, you don't just die, you turn into a zombie.
A conscious zombie, which is worse.
So much worse. Your body rots, but you stay alive, and you are cursed with this perpetual, insatiable, agonizing hunger that can never, ever be satisfied.
It's a brilliantly visceral image. You have this character who desires wealth so much that he literally subjects himself to a curse of infinite rotting hunger.
And of course, the greed is so intoxicating that Vinayak's son eventually tries to figure out a way to steal all the gold at once, and, well, it leads to absolute horrific destruction.
Because getting exactly what you want is often the exact thing that destroys you. It's the perfect physical manifestation of a concept we see echoed across all of human history.
I mean, it is the ultimate metaphor for a Faustian bargain.
Absolutely.
It's that classic scenario where some entity comes along and says, I will fulfill your deepest, darkest, most desperate desire, but the very hunger that drove you to make the deal ends up completely unraveling your life.
But here's the thing about the Faustian bargain today. No devil in a sharp red coat is going to knock on your apartment door tonight, offering you a magical contract signed in blood.
Right, the guys with the horns don't exist. So if the devil is just a metaphor, what does it actually mean to sell your soul in the modern world?
That is the million-dollar question.
And that's our mission for today's deep dive. We are unpacking the most famous version of this story ever told, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Faust.
A total masterpiece.
We're going to use it to decode the actual mechanics of human desire and why the most dangerous bargains we make are, well, they're the ones we negotiate with ourselves.
To really grasp the gravity of this, I think we have to start at the end of a very long, very extraordinary life.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So I want you to picture March 22, 1832. We are in the city of Weimar, Germany. In a quiet, sunlit room, there is an 82-year-old man sitting in an armchair.
And he's completely blind at this point, right?
Yes, entirely blind. And he is widely considered the greatest genius of his age, the absolute titan of European literature and thought.
Johann Wolfgang von Goethe.
Exactly. In his final moments, as his breathing slows, people see him weakly tracing words in the air with his finger. And right before he passes away, he utters his famous last words, which translate to, "More light."
More light. I mean, it just gives you chills. It's so poetic.
It really is.
But reading through our sources, you realize it's also the perfect distillation of his entire existence. Because before we meet the fictional character of Faust, we really have to look at Goethe himself.
Right, because Goethe didn't just write about a man who wanted to know and experience absolutely everything. Goethe basically was that man.
His life was this obsessive, multifaceted pursuit of literally everything there was to know.
He's often referred to as the Shakespeare of Germany, but honestly, comparing him to Shakespeare almost feels too narrow.
How so?
Well, Shakespeare was a master of the human condition through drama. Goethe was a master of the human condition, sure, but he was also a scientist, an anatomist, a botanist, a physicist, a statesman. I mean, he was a true polymath.
He didn't just dabble either.
No, he fundamentally altered how people understood the natural world. Take his work in anatomy. He is actually credited with proving that humans possess the inner maxillary bone.
Which I have to admit sounds incredibly dry until you realize the theological implications of what he was doing.
Exactly. It was a huge deal.
Because prior to Goethe's discovery, anatomists believed the inner maxillary bone, which is the bone that holds the upper incisor teeth in animals like dogs and apes, they thought it was completely missing in humans.
They looked at our flatter faces and just couldn't find it.
But this wasn't just like a scientific oversight. It was a deeply held theological necessity.
It was the great chain of being.
Yes, the scientific and religious consensus of the time desperately wanted a hard, physical, biological line separating human beings from the rest of the animal kingdom.
They wanted proof we were special.
Right. They used the supposed absence of this bone as divine proof that we were a special creation placed above the beasts.
And then Goethe comes along. He examines human skulls with microscopic attention, and he finds the tiny sutures hidden in the human palate.
He proves the bone is there. It's just fused.
Exactly. And by doing that, he wasn't just updating a medical textbook. He was shattering the biological wall between humans and animals.
He was laying the early philosophical groundwork for evolutionary theory decades before Darwin.
He was just obsessed with the interconnectedness of nature. He couldn't stand the idea of artificial boundaries. But, anatomy wasn't enough for him.
Of course not.
He spent 40 years of his life stubbornly, obsessively challenging Isaac Newton's theory of light.
Okay, let me jump in here with some skepticism, because I really struggled with this part of the material when I was prepping.
Sure, what's the hang-up?
Well, Newton had mathematical proof. He had the physics locked down, demonstrating that white light contains all the colors of the spectrum, which you separate with a prism. Newton treated color as an objective physical property of light.
Right, it exists out there independently of us.
Exactly. So was Goethe actually onto something profound with his 400-page book, The Theory of Colors? Or is this just the ultimate case of a massively famous author suffering from hubris, thinking he could reinvent physics by staring at the sky?
It's a really fair critique, and physicists at the time certainly dismissed Goethe, but we have to look at what Goethe was actually arguing. He wasn't arguing the mathematics of wavelengths.
What was he arguing then?
He was arguing phenomenology. His core premise was that color is not merely a physical property floating out there in the void. It is a subjective human experience.
Okay, I see where you're going.
He argued that color is produced by the interaction of light and darkness, and crucially, it requires the human eye and the human mind to actually exist as an experience.
If a tree falls in the forest kind of thing.
Exactly. If there is no eye to perceive it, is it color or is it just a wavelength? He was trying to insert the observer, the human consciousness, back into the scientific equation.
That actually feels incredibly prescient. It sounds almost like the debates we have today in quantum mechanics or modern neuroscience.
How do you mean?
Like the idea that our perception actively shapes reality, rather than us just being passive cameras recording an objective universe.
That is exactly it. Goethe was terrified of a world where science reduced everything to cold, dead mechanics. He wanted a science that included the soul, the subjective experience.
And while he's fighting these massive scientific battles, he's also writing international blockbusters.
Massive blockbuster.
When he was just 26, he published a novel called The Sorrows of Young Werther.
Such a tragic story.
It really is. It's an epistolary novel about a young, highly sensitive artist who falls tragically in love with an engaged woman, and when he realizes he can never possess her, he ends his own life.
Calling it a blockbuster is almost an understatement. The cultural phenomenon of Werther is really hard to comprehend today.
It went incredibly viral.
Yeah, young men all over Europe started dressing like the main character, blue tailcoats and yellow waistcoats. They called it Werther fever.
There were even reports of copycat suicides, which deeply disturbed Goethe. The historical anecdotes from the sources are just wild.
Oh, especially the one about Napoleon.
Yes, Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who spent his life conquering continents with artillery, was so utterly obsessed with this novel about a fragile, heartbroken poet that he reportedly read it 7 times.
Napoleon literally carried it with him onto the battlefields of Egypt. Think about the psychological juxtaposition there.
It's staggering.
The Emperor of the French, surrounded by the carnage of war, seeking solace in a book about unrequited love and suicide. That is the level of emotional resonance Goethe was capable of achieving.
He could capture the raw nerve of human desire so perfectly that it captivated everyone from peasants to emperors.
But the reason he could write about these tearing, destructive desires is because his own personal life was an absolute tempest.
Right, he wasn't observing this from an ivory tower. Look at his relationship with Charlotte von Stein.
Oh, that was intense.
She was a married woman, 7 years older than him, deeply embedded in the Weimar court, and a mother of 7 children.
And Goethe was completely consumed by her.
Entirely. Obsessively consumed by her for 12 years. Our sources note he wrote her something like 1,600 letters. There were days he was writing to her multiple times a day.
The sheer volume of that correspondence indicates a mind that is constantly churning. Whether the relationship was ever physically consummated remains a historical debate, but emotionally, it was an all-consuming fire.
Goethe was constantly yearning for a perfect union, an ideal connection that was practically and socially impossible to realize.
And you can only sustain that level of intense, frustrated yearning for so long before something breaks.
Which it did. When Goethe was 37, right at the peak of his social standing in Weimar, he was a respected statesman, a famous author, a darling of the court. He just snapped.
He was on a holiday spa trip, right?
Yeah, and in the middle of the night, he packed a small bag, didn't tell a single soul where he was going, not even his employer, the Duke, and completely vanished.
Just walked away from it all.
Fled across the Alps to Italy. He lived there for 2 years under an assumed name, completely reinventing himself, absorbing the classical art, the Mediterranean sun, the freedom.
He actually wrote back a letter during this Italian journey where he stated that his soul had changed to the bone.
Soul changed to the bone. That's powerful.
She felt he had shed a dead skin. He had mastered his environment in Weimar, but rather than settling into the comfort of his success, he felt a profound existential claustrophobia. Stagnation, to Goethe, was a fate worse than death.
He had a catchphrase that perfectly sums this up.
Okay.
He said, "He who constantly changes is my relative. He who stops is dead."
It's so true to his character.
You see this pattern throughout his entire biography. He had this habit of diving headfirst into a field, mastering it to the point of exhaustion, and then immediately abandoning it to start something entirely new.
It's surprisingly relatable, honestly.
Right. If you've ever bought all the expensive gear for rock climbing, done it obsessively every weekend for 6 months, and then suddenly decided you are going to become a master potter and never touch the climbing gear again, Goethe is basically your patron saint.
It is the defining characteristic of the Faustian personality, that endless, restless striving, the underlying panic that if you stop seeking the next horizon, if you ever allow yourself to be merely satisfied, you are spiritually decaying.
And this brings us to the character of Faust himself. Goethe poured this restless energy into the character, but Faust was not Goethe's original invention.
Right, there was an actual historical guy named Johann Faust wandering around Germany in the 15th and 16th century.
It's the real Faust.
Yes. The historical Johann Faust was a traveling astrologer, an alchemist, a medical practitioner of dubious credentials, and a magician.
But what made him famous wasn't his magic tricks, it was his marketing.
Exactly. He actively cultivated a terrifying, blasphemous reputation. He claimed that his knowledge, his ability to read the stars and perform feats, did not come from university study.
He claimed he got them directly from a demonic pact that he had signed in his own blood.
I mean, if you are a traveling magician in the 1500s, telling the local villagers that you literally sold your soul to the devil to get these powers is a guaranteed way to sell tickets.
It's great branding. But we have to look at why that specific claim worked so well at that specific time. This is the era of the Protestant Reformation in Germany. Martin Luther is nailing his theses to the door.
Society is undergoing massive religious upheaval.
People are terrified of damnation, of witchcraft, of the devil walking among them.
You've hit on the crucial context. The 16th century was a powder keg of theological anxiety. The world felt unstable. Furthermore, you have the recent invention of the printing press.
Right, information is spreading faster.
So when the historical Faust died around 1540, and the local rumors immediately claimed his body was found mutilated because the devil had come to collect his due, this story didn't just stay a local piece of gossip.
By 1587, an anonymous author publishes the Historia of Dr. Johann Faust, known as the Faust book.
And thanks to the printing press, this sensationalized account spreads across Europe like wildfire.
It's the 16th century equivalent of a viral true crime deep dive.
Precisely. It reaches England, where the great playwright Christopher Marlowe adapts it into his famous play, The Tragical History of the Life and Death of Dr. Faustus.
But Marlowe's version, much like the original Faust book, is a straightforward, terrifying morality play.
Faust makes the deal for worldly pleasure, he gets his 24 years of power, and in the end, despite his weeping and begging, he is dragged screaming into the fiery pit of hell as a warning to the audience about the dangers of overreaching.
But Goethe's relationship with this myth takes a completely different path. He first encountered the story not in a highbrow academic text, but at a local puppet show when he was just a kid, around 8 or 9 years old.
It planted a seed in his brain that never stopped growing.
He started drafting his own version of Faust when he was 23 years old, and he didn't finish it in a year. He didn't finish it in a decade.
He spent 60 years writing and rewriting this one single narrative.
60 years. He sealed the final manuscript of Faust Part 2 just months before he died at age 82, with strict instructions that it shouldn't be published until he was gone.
60 years of continuous contemplation. This means that Goethe's Faust isn't just a snapshot of a young author's mind.
It's a life's work.
It is a living document that contains the accumulated wisdom, the shifting philosophies, the scientific discoveries, and the evolving worldview of a towering genius over his entire adult life. It is an exploration of the absolute limits of human experience.
So how does a man who seemingly has everything end up sitting in a room and signing his soul away to the devil?
Let's get into the actual machinery of the story, starting with Faust Part 1.
It doesn't start in a spooky castle. It starts with a cosmic wager.
Right. The prologue in heaven?
Yes. Goethe is deliberately mirroring the biblical story of Job here. God is surrounded by archangels who are singing the praises of the majestic, orderly creation of the universe.
And suddenly, the devil enters. In Goethe's telling, he is named Mephistopheles. And Mephistopheles is the ultimate cynic. He is sarcastic, mocking, and deeply unimpressed by the supposed majesty of creation, particularly humanity.
He basically tells God, you gave these human beings a tiny spark of divine reason, and what do they do with it? They use it to become more bestial than any animal. They just torture themselves with anxiety and unfulfilled desires.
And God counters this by asking, "Do you know my servant, Dr. Faust?"
And Mephistopheles just laughs. He knows Faust perfectly. He knows Faust is the exact mess he's talking about.
Mephistopheles says, "Oh, the guy who wants to grasp the stars but can't keep his feet on the ground, the man who is never satisfied."
But God has a fundamental faith in the core of humanity. God allows Mephistopheles to go down to earth and try to corrupt Faust, stating, a good man in his dark, bewildered course knows the right path inside.
God is betting that despite all of Faust's restless ambition and intellectual despair, his core is inherently sound.
And Mephistopheles eagerly takes the bet. He is confident he can drag Faust down into the dirt.
The scene then shifts to Earth, where we finally meet the man himself.
And the atmosphere Goethe builds here is heavy. It's a classic, oppressive Gothic setting, a high-vaulted, dimly lit study.
It is crammed floor to ceiling with towering stacks of books, dusty scrolls, skulls, test tubes, and archaic scientific instruments.
Faust is sitting at his desk. He is in his 50s, which in the 16th century was quite old. He looks pale, physically exhausted, with dark hollows under his eyes.
This is a man who is universally recognized by his society as the most educated individual alive.
He delivers this famous, agonizing opening monologue. He says, I have mastered philosophy, law, medicine, and unfortunately even theology. People call me a master, a doctor.
But the punchline of that monologue is the source of his profound despair. He has studied everything, categorized everything, read every text written by human hands.
And yet he says, I see that we can know nothing.
He realizes that all his academic knowledge is just a catalog of the surface of reality. He knows the names of things, but he feels he knows absolutely nothing of the real truth, the actual pulsating essence of life.
He hasn't actually lived. He has only observed life through the dusty filter of books.
The intellectual isolation is just crushing him. He feels completely disconnected from the world.
He is in such a profound, suffocating state of depression that he decides the only logical step is to end his own life.
He reaches for a small crystal vial of poison.
He holds it to his lips, fully intending to drink it, but right at that absolute precipice, an external sound breaks through the walls of his study.
The Easter bells.
Yes, he hears the joyous ringing of Easter church bells from the town outside, accompanied by a choir singing.
The sound of those bells acts as a psychological tether. It triggers a flood of visceral childhood memories.
It reminds him of a time when he possessed blind faith.
When he felt organically connected to the community and the universe, before his towering intellect paralyzed his ability to feel, the nostalgia is so overwhelmingly powerful that his hand falters.
He lowers the poison. The memory of faith pulls him back from the brink of annihilation.
Realizing he needs to escape his own mind, he steps outside. He goes out into the town square where the common people are celebrating the Easter festival.
He walks among them, watching them drink, dance, and flirt, desperately trying to feel some connection to their simple joys. But he remains an outsider.
And as the sun sets and he starts walking back home, he notices a black poodle trotting behind him.
Which is incredibly ominous.
It starts running in widening circles around him, leaving a faint trail of fire. The dog follows him all the way back into his dark study.
Once inside the study, the dog's behavior becomes increasingly erratic. It begins to swell, its eyes glowing a demonic red.
Faust realizes this is no ordinary animal and begins chanting magical incantations.
In a thick cloud of obscuring smoke, the dog transforms. And standing there in the middle of Faust's study is a man dressed as a traveling nobleman in a sharp red coat.
This is Mephistopheles.
Faust, who is initially more curious than terrified, asks him who he is, and Mephistopheles gives one of the most brilliant paradoxical introductions in all of literature.
He says, I am part of that power which always wills evil and always produces good.
He defines himself as a force of pure negation, a force that wants to destroy. But in its very act of destruction, it inadvertently creates motion, forcing the universe forward.
Mephistopheles is a master negotiator. He doesn't threaten Faust. He observes him. He sees a man at the absolute end of his rope, a man who has lost faith in the value of human existence.
So Mephistopheles makes his pitch. He offers a very specific, legally binding contract.
He says, I will be your servant in this life, whatever you desire, unlimited power, hidden knowledge, the most beautiful women, unimaginable wealth. I will use my supernatural abilities to procure it for you instantly.
But in exchange, when your life on earth ends in the afterlife, you will be my servant for eternity.
But the brilliance of Goethe's version is that Faust doesn't just accept those terms.
No, Faust is so deeply entrenched in his depression, so utterly convinced of the fundamental misery of human existence, that he genuinely does not believe the devil has the capacity to give him anything that will truly satisfy him.
Faust looks at the devil and says, basically, you think you can make me happy. I bet my soul you can't.
So Faust dictates a specific trigger clause to the contract.
It is the most famous wager in literary history. Faust agrees to forfeit his soul, but the payment is only triggered if he ever experiences a single moment in his life that is so perfectly beautiful, so deeply, profoundly fulfilling, that he wants time to stop.
The exact phrasing is that if Faust ever says to the passing moment, "Stop, you are so beautiful," or "Linger a while, thou art so fair," then the clock instantly stops. Faust drops dead, and the devil takes his soul to hell.
It is a terrifying concept.
I think about this like the ultimate high-stakes subscription service. You download the app, and you agree to terms of service that explicitly say, if you ever hit like on a single piece of content, we legally own your soul forever.
That's a great way to put it.
And Faust signs that contract in a drop of his own blood, completely confident that he will never, ever hit like. He is placing a massive, arrogant bet against his own capacity for joy.
He believes human satisfaction is a biological and philosophical myth. He is certain that the human condition is an endless treadmill of dissatisfaction.
He signs it, and the ink or the blood dries. Faust is now in possession of unlimited cosmic power. He has a supernatural entity as his personal assistant.
So we have to ask, what does a man who has mastered all academic knowledge actually ask for when he can have anything?
He doesn't ask for mountains of gold. He doesn't ask to be an emperor. He tells Mephistopheles, I want to live. I want to experience the raw, unfiltered, chaotic mess of life that I missed while I was locked in this dusty room.
And to do that, to dive into the sensual world, he needs his youth back.
Mephistopheles obliges. He takes Faust to a witch's kitchen.
It is a grotesque, chaotic, almost hallucinatory scene filled with bubbling cauldrons, bizarre familiars, and nonsensical riddles.
The witch brews a potent magical potion for Faust. He drinks it, and the physical transformation is instantaneous. 30 years of age literally melt away from his body.
The exhausted, pale scholar is transformed into a vibrant, handsome young man pulsing with vitality.
But the physical transformation isn't the most dangerous part of this scene. Right before they leave the witch's kitchen, Faust catches sight of a magic mirror hanging on the wall.
He looks into it, and he doesn't see his own reflection.
He sees a vision of a woman. But it's not just a beautiful woman. He sees the image of Helen of Troy, the mythological absolute pinnacle of female beauty and perfection.
He is instantly, overwhelmingly mesmerized. He turns to the devil and demands her.
And Mephistopheles, with his characteristic cold, cynical smile, tells Faust, after drinking that potion, you will see Helen of Troy in every woman you meet.
The potion hasn't just reversed his cellular aging, it has weaponized his libido and his imagination.
It has primed his mind to project the ultimate, impossible ideal of beauty onto normal, flawed reality.
And this leads us directly into the emotional core of part one, which is the agonizing collateral damage of Faust's newly unleashed desires.
Because the very moment Faust walks out onto the street in his youthful body, his eyes land on a girl coming out of church. Her name is Margaret, though she is affectionately known as Gretchen.
She is very young, likely around 14 or 15 years old. She is incredibly poor. She is pure, naive, and deeply, sincerely religious.
She is the exact opposite of Faust's complex intellectualism.
Faust sees her and is instantly consumed by an aggressive, overwhelming desire. He demands that Mephistopheles procure her for him.
Now, even Mephistopheles scoffs at this. He points out the absurdity. He basically says, you have the power of the devil at your absolute command, and you want this completely unremarkable, simple, devout peasant girl.
But Faust is irrational, he insists. So the devil goes to work, and Goethe masterfully shows us exactly how insidious demonic manipulation really is.
It isn't about casting spells on people's free will. It's about exploiting their existing psychological cracks.
It is pure psychological warfare. Mephistopheles sneaks into Gretchen's small, humble bedroom while she is out. He doesn't leave a cursed artifact. He leaves a small, ornate casket filled with magnificent, sparkling jewels.
When Gretchen comes home, finds the box, and puts the jewels on, she looks at herself in the mirror. And for the very first time in her hard, impoverished, marginalized life, she feels beautiful.
She feels valuable. The devil simply exploits her natural human vanity and her deep-seated societal insecurities.
It's a tragic realization for the reader. Faust, driven by his abstract, towering desire for authentic experience, has locked on to someone incredibly vulnerable.
Gretchen becomes the canvas for his fantasy. And from this single moment of vanity, a cascading, unstoppable tragedy begins to unfold, destroying everything in Gretchen's orbit.
Faust begins to court her. Gretchen is completely out of her depths. She asks him earnest questions about his faith in God, and Faust gives these complex, pantheistic, philosophical answers that she doesn't really understand. But she is swept off her feet by his attention and his apparent nobility.
But there is a practical obstacle. Gretchen lives with her strict, overbearing mother.
So, Faust gives Gretchen a small vial. He tells her it is a harmless sleeping potion. He says, just give 3 drops of this to your mother so she sleeps deeply and we can finally spend the night together in peace.
Gretchen, trusting Faust completely, administers the drops to her mother, but Faust, or perhaps the devil's hidden influence, has miscalculated the dosage or simply lied.
It isn't a sleeping potion. It is a lethal poison. Gretchen's mother never wakes up. She dies of a fatal overdose. Gretchen, seeking love, has unknowingly committed matricide.
And the dominoes just keep falling faster. Gretchen discovers she is pregnant out of wedlock.
In the context of a strict 16th century religious village, this is not just a scandal, it is absolute social ruin. She is a pariah.
To make matters worse, her older brother, Valentine, who is a soldier, returns from military duty. He hears the vicious village gossip about his sister's disgrace.
Enraged and humiliated, he tracks Faust down in the street at night to defend his family's honor. They draw swords, but it's an impossible fight.
Mephistopheles uses his dark magic to paralyze Valentine's sword arm, leaving him defenseless, allowing Faust to run him through.
As Valentine lies bleeding to death in the dirt of the street, a crowd gathers from the commotion, and Gretchen pushes her way to the front.
And with his final agonizing breaths, her own brother does not offer her comfort or forgiveness. He publicly curses her.
He calls her a whore and blames her entirely for his murder and the permanent stain on their family name.
It is absolutely brutal to read. Stop and look at her reality. Her mother is dead by her own hand. Her brother is murdered by her lover. She is a complete social outcast. The town is turning on her, and she is entirely alone with a child on the way.
The psychological weight of this reality simply breaks her. Her mind fractures. She completely loses her sanity.
In a state of profound, despairing madness, she takes her newborn baby and drowns it in a pond.
She is quickly arrested, thrown into a dark, freezing dungeon, and sentenced to be executed by the sword at dawn.
And while this horrifying sequence of events is systematically dismantling Gretchen's life and mind, we must ask, what is Faust doing?
This is where Goethe highlights the sheer narcissistic disconnect of the Faustian bargain. Faust is utterly unaware of her suffering.
Mephistopheles has deliberately distracted him by taking him to the Witches' Sabbath, a chaotic, demonic festival on Walpurgis night.
Faust is partying, drinking, and losing himself in hedonistic, supernatural debauchery, while the woman he supposedly loved more than life itself is rotting in a dungeon waiting to be beheaded.
He only snaps out of this trance when he has a sudden, terrifying hallucination amidst the partying. He sees a pale, ghostly vision of Gretchen, and she has a thin, red line of blood drawn perfectly across her neck.
Reality suddenly crashes in on him. He furiously turns on the devil, screaming at him, "Why didn't you tell me she was in prison? Why didn't you tell me she was suffering?"
And Mephistopheles just looks at him with this chilling, calm smile and says, "She is not the first."
He essentially points out, you didn't ask. You didn't want to know the consequences of your desires.
It's a devastating indictment of Faust's willful ignorance. He wanted the pleasure without the responsibility.
He forces Mephistopheles to take him to the prison immediately to rescue her. This leads to the climax of Part 1, which is a masterpiece of tragic theater.
Faust sneaks into her cell. It's the middle of the night before her execution. Gretchen is completely mad.
She doesn't even recognize him when he walks in. She is sitting on the cold stone floor, singing a haunting lullaby at the baby she murdered, thinking Faust is the executioner coming early.
Faust is desperate, practically begging her. He tells her he has magic, he has the devil waiting outside, he can break the locks, they can escape together and start over.
But then, in a moment of piercing, tragic clarity that cuts right through her madness, Gretchen looks closely at Faust. She feels him, and she says, "Your lips are cold."
Even though her mind is broken, her soul recognizes a fundamental truth. Faust's love for her is already dead.
The burning passion that drove him to ruin her life has already burned out. He wants to save her now out of a sense of guilt, out of desire to clean up his mess, not out of true, enduring love.
And because she realizes this, she makes an impossible choice. She refuses to go with him. She refuses the devil's escape route.
She looks at him and says, I submit myself to the judgment of God.
The sun starts to rise, illuminating the cell. The executioners arrive. Faust and Mephistopheles are forced to flee.
But as Gretchen is executed, a voice calls down from heaven, ringing through the prison walls. She is saved.
That divine voice is crucial. It signifies that despite her horrific crimes, involuntary matricide, infanticide, her soul is ultimately redeemed because she accepted responsibility for her actions and refused to take the final corrupting bargain offered by the devil.
But for Faust, the lesson is stark and horrifying. The brutal reality of the Faustian bargain is that the cost is rarely paid only by the person making the deal.
The true agonizing cost is paid by the innocent people around them who are caught in the blast radius of their infinite reckless desires.
Which brings us to a massive psychological question that we really need to unpack. Why was Faust so intensely, obsessively driven to possess Gretchen, only to cause her absolute ruin, and then almost immediately after the fire of that passion dies, he's basically ready to move on to the next shiny object?
It's a pattern.
Why do human beings do this? To understand this, we actually need to pause the narrative for a second and deconstruct the fundamental mechanics of human desire itself.
Our sources provide an incredibly useful framework for this by bringing in the perspective of the contemporary Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek.
Right, Žižek.
He has written extensively on the nature of ideology, culture, and desire, often utilizing Lacanian psychoanalytic theory. And his core premise regarding desire is quite counterintuitive to how we normally think about ourselves.
We tend to think of desire as a natural, spontaneous biological urge that wells up from within us. We think, I am thirsty, therefore I naturally desire water.
But Žižek argues that complex human desire, the desire for a specific person, a career, a status symbol, is not natural at all. He argues that we have to learn how to desire, and more importantly, we learn what to desire based on external societal frameworks and fantasies.
Our texts provide a brilliant thought experiment from Žižek that makes this perfectly clear. It's the example of the mistress.
Oh, this is a great one.
I want you to imagine a married man. He has a wife, but he also has a secret mistress. And he spends all his time agonizing over this mistress. He thinks about her day and night.
He tells himself, if only I wasn't married, if only my wife wasn't in the picture, I could be with my true love and I would be perfectly, infinitely happy.
He genuinely convinces himself that the mistress is the ultimate, perfect object of his desire.
But then Ayush posits a tragic twist in this scenario. Imagine the man's wife suddenly passes away in an accident. The barrier is completely removed.
He is now completely free to marry his mistress, to live with her openly, to introduce her to his friends and have that perfect happiness he constantly dreamed of.
But as psychoanalysis often reveals, what frequently happens in this exact scenario is that the man suddenly loses his attraction to the mistress. The passionate, burning desire evaporates almost overnight.
The man is confused. It's the exact same woman. Her personality hasn't changed. Her looks haven't changed. So why did the intense feeling disappear?
And Žižek's answer is a gut punch to our romantic ideals. The attraction was never really about the actual woman herself. The attraction was generated by the barrier.
The fact that she was forbidden, the fact that she was kept at a distance and required secrecy, is what created the necessary space for his desire to exist.
Žižek introduces a critical concept here that he calls the imaginary extra. The idea is that we never just desire an object or a person for what they materially, objectively are.
The actual object is always somewhat lacking. It's just a regular thing or a flawed human.
Exactly. So to fuel our burning desire, our minds project an illusion, an imaginary extra onto that object. We convince ourselves that this specific thing possesses a magical, transcendent quality that, once acquired, will finally make us whole and erase our anxieties.
The text gives a highly relatable modern analogy for this that I think perfectly explains how our consumer culture operates. Think about the psychological life cycle of buying a piece of high-end tech.
Like a new phone.
Or let's say a new pair of premium noise-canceling headphones. You don't just walk into a store, look at a box, and buy them. The desire has to be built.
First, you watch 15 different YouTube reviews.
You read intricate Reddit threads debating the base response. You obsess over the specs. You wait for weeks for a holiday sale to drop the price. When you finally click buy, you track the shipping package every hour.
During this entire buildup, you are convinced that when these headphones arrive, your noisy commute will be transformed into a cinematic experience. Your focus at work will be laser sharp. Your life will objectively level up.
That entire anticipation phase, that obsessive buildup, is the active construction of the imaginary extra. You aren't just buying plastic, lithium batteries and magnets. You are buying a projected fantasy of a better, calmer, more focused version of yourself.
And then the box arrives.
You do the whole unboxing ritual. You put them on. You play your favorite song.
Yeah.
And they sound good. They're nice headphones.
But within 3 days, maybe a week, the magic is completely gone.
They're just the things you throw into your backpack and occasionally forget to charge. The transcendent feeling you chased for a month has completely evaporated. Why?
Because the imaginary extra was never physically located inside the headphones, it was a projection of your own mind. And the moment you acquire the physical object, the projection collapses.
And if we apply Eject's framework back to Goethe's Faust, the horrifying tragedy of Gretchen suddenly makes perfect psychological sense.
Faust didn't fall in love with the real, complex, flawed human being named Margaret.
He was intoxicated by the witch's potion, and he projected a massive, towering, imaginary extra onto her. He projected his desperate need for meaning, for lost youth, for innocence, onto this simple village girl.
He looked at her and essentially said, "You are the answer to my 50 years of existential dread."
Which is an absolutely impossible burden to place on a teenager.
Yeah.
And the moment he actually possessed her, the moment she became a real, terrified, pregnant girl facing societal execution, the fantasy shattered.
The barrier was gone, the reality set in, and the imaginary extra vanished into thin air.
And what was left was just the grim, tragic reality of a ruined life that Faust was entirely unequipped to handle.
He was chasing a ghost of his own making. And because the imaginary extra always fades upon acquisition, the inherent nature of the Faustian personality is to immediately discard the acquired object and find a new, larger target to project the fantasy onto.
The cycle must continue. This is the engine of the Faustian bargain. It is a machine of perpetual dissatisfaction.
Which means Faust realizes that interpersonal love is a dead end for his infinite hunger. So what happens when a mind like that gets bored with individuals and turns its ambition toward the entire planet?
He scales up, and that is exactly what happens in Faust Part 2.
Part 2 is vastly different from Part 1. It is sprawling, heavily symbolic, and deals with macro-level desires. Faust and Mephistopheles leave the small villages behind and travel to the court of a powerful emperor.
But the empire is completely bankrupt. The treasury is empty.
So Faust, using his vast intellect and the devil's power, invents the concept of paper money.
Which is such a brilliant, cynical detail from Goethe. Faust essentially creates wealth out of thin air, out of a printed promise. It's the ultimate magical trick that our entire modern global economy is built on the abstraction of value.
It's a sharp critique of modern capitalism's reliance on abstraction. But Faust's ambition continues to balloon. He decides that human women are no longer enough for him.
He uses his dark magic to reach back into the mists of antiquity and literally summon the spirit of Helen of Troy. The actual mythological Helen, not just a vision in a mirror.
He marries her. They live in a fantastical realm and even have a child together named Euphorion.
But Euphorion is a symbol of reckless, boundless ambition. The boy tries to fly, leaps off a cliff, and dies instantly.
Upon his death, Helen vanishes back into the underworld, leaving Faust empty-handed once again.
So even possessing the mythological peak of beauty in history doesn't satisfy him. We fast forward through decades of these massive worldly pursuits. Faust is now an old man again. He is 100 years old.
He is physically blind, much like Goethe was at the end of his life.
But his ambition is bigger than it has ever been. He has embarked on a massive global engineering project. He wants to literally push back the ocean.
He is commanding armies of workers to build dikes and dams to reclaim land from the sea, with the goal of building a completely new, free, utopian society where millions of people can live and thrive under his grand vision.
He has transitioned from wanting to passively experience the world to wanting to physically shape it, to become a creator god himself.
But Goethe refuses to let Faust off the hook. Even in this grand, supposedly noble utopian project, there is a micro-tragedy that exposes the moral rot at the core of his ambition.
Right, the story of Philemon and Baucis. It's a devastating little sequence. On the massive stretch of coastline that Faust is reclaiming, there is a tiny ancient plot of land sitting on a hill.
And on this land, there is a small rundown hut owned by a sweet elderly couple named Philemon and Baucis. They have a little garden, a bell that rings in the evening, and a small chapel.
It's a picture of simple, traditional, contented life.
But Faust is obsessed with total control and perfection. He wants to build an observation tower on that exact hill so he can look out over his entire domain.
The fact that he doesn't own this one tiny speck of land infuriates him. It's an intolerable flaw in his grand design. It offends his sense of mastery.
He offers to buy it, he offers to relocate them to a better estate, but the old couple refuses. They want to die where they have lived their whole lives.
So Faust, impatient and frustrated by this minor obstacle, turns to Mephistopheles. He says, "Just get them out of there. Move them."
He doesn't explicitly order their deaths, but he knows exactly who he is talking to. He turns a blind eye to the methods.
And Mephistopheles, being the devil, doesn't bother with drawn-out negotiations or forced relocation. In the middle of the night, he and his demons simply set the old couple's hut on fire.
Philemon and Baucis are burned alive in their beds.
When Faust finds out, he is horrified. He feels true, piercing guilt, but the damage is permanently done. His glorious utopia is built on the ashes of innocent people.
This brings us to the absolute climax of the entire 60-year saga. Faust is standing on the balcony of his palace. He is completely blind, but he hears a sound. He hears the rhythmic clinking of spades hitting the earth. Clink, clink, clink.
Faust smiles. Because he is blind, he interprets this sound entirely through the lens of his own massive ego and his desires.
He believes he is hearing the sound of thousands of workers digging the canals, building the final stages of his glorious, free, utopian land. He is overwhelmed by a magnificent vision of this future society.
And in this moment of overwhelming pride and vision, he gives a grand speech. He envisions a free people standing on free land, and then he finally says them. The fatal words he agreed to decades ago in his dusty study.
He raises his hands and says to the moment, "Stop, oh moment, you are so beautiful."
It is the trigger clause. The moment the words leave his lips, Faust drops dead. The contract is fulfilled.
But the layers of irony here are incredibly thick. First, he doesn't say the words about a present, tangible reality. He says it about a vision of the future that exists entirely in his own mind.
And the second, even darker irony is the source of the sound. He thought it was workers building his utopia. But Goethe reveals that the sound Faust was actually hearing wasn't construction at all.
It was Mephistopheles' demons using spades to dig Faust's own grave.
He died mistaking the sound of his own death for the sound of ultimate human progress.
So Faust falls dead. Mephistopheles steps up, contract in hand, rubbing his hands together, ready to claim the soul he has worked so hard to corrupt over the last century.
He summons his demons, preparing to drag Faust to hell, but then Goethe delivers one of the most controversial plot twists in literary history.
The angels show up.
A host of heavenly angels descend from the sky, and they don't fight the demons with flaming swords, they distract them. They start dropping pink roses onto the demons and onto Mephistopheles' head.
The roses act like burning fire to the demons. The devil gets distracted. He starts swatting at the flowers. He's confused, maybe even feeling a bizarre tinge of angelic love that physically burns him.
And while he is distracted, the angels literally swoop in, steal Faust's immortal soul from the grave, and fly away with it up to heaven.
Mephistopheles is left standing by the empty grave, furious, realizing he has been completely cheated out of his prize.
Up in heaven, Faust's soul is welcomed, and the very first soul to greet him and guide him upward is Gretchen. The woman he ruined has forgiven him.
And a divine choir sings the moral of the story, essentially declaring, "He who always strives, we save."
Okay, we need to pause here because when I read this ending in the sources, My jaw dropped. I was actually angry.
It's a huge pivot.
It feels like a massive cheat.
Yeah.
The guy ruined a young girl's life. He inadvertently burned an old couple alive. He unleashed the devil on the world for 100 years. And he gets a VIP pass to heaven because he strived. What is the philosophical logic here?
You are definitely not alone in that reaction. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche absolutely despised this ending. Nietzsche believed it was a sign of Goethe's emotional weakness in his old age.
I can see why.
Nietzsche argued that a tragedy should remain a tragedy. Actions must have consequences. To have the angels swoop in as a deus ex machina and save a man who caused so much destruction felt intellectually dishonest and cowardly to him.
But Goethe wasn't an idiot. He spent 60 years on this. He had a very specific thesis he was trying to prove, right?
Exactly. Goethe was making a profound, controversial distinction about the nature of human desire. He isn't saying that causing pain is good or that the ends justify the means. What he is arguing is that the raw, churning energy of desire, that restless need for more, is not inherently evil.
In part one, Faust's desires were entirely selfish. He was hoarding personal imaginary extras like youth and lust. That is a path that leads nowhere.
But in part two, despite his massive flaws and the collateral damage, Faust's desire shifts outward. He stops trying to consume the world and starts trying to create something for the broader world. He tries to build a society for others.
Goethe's argument is that the willingness to act, to build, to constantly push forward into the unknown, even when it results in terrible errors, is the very spark of the divine in humanity. It is better to act and err than to sit in a dusky study, paralyzed by intellect, and do nothing.
The texts tie this ending to another massive philosophical concept, Arthur Schopenhauer's idea of the will. Schopenhauer wrote a foundational book called The World as Will and Representation, and he actually used Goethe's Faust as the prime example of his entire theory.
Yes, Schopenhauer posited that the fundamental reality of the universe isn't matter or logic or a benevolent God. It is a blind, hungry, irrational force that he simply called the will.
This will is constantly striving, constantly desiring to manifest itself without any ultimate purpose or end goal, and human beings with our complex brains are the highest, most self-aware expressions of this cosmic will.
Wait, so Schopenhauer thinks everything is this blind, hungry force? How does that explain human rationality? Because we plan things, we build things with logic.
Schopenhauer would argue that our rationality is just a tool developed by the will to help it get what it wants more efficiently. Our intellect is the servant of our desires.
That's a dark way to look at intelligence.
And because we are driven by this insatiable will, Schopenhauer argued that human life is essentially a pendulum swinging between two miserable states: the agonizing pain of wanting something you don't have, and the deadening boredom you feel the moment you finally get it.
Wanting hurts and having is boring. So you just invent a new want.
Precisely. Let's look at a relatable example. Think about working toward a massive career goal, like getting a massive promotion or finishing a huge creative project.
Okay, I'm with you.
For months or years, you are in the pain of wanting phase. You are stressed, you are striving, you feel a lack. Then the day comes, you get the promotion, you pop the champagne. How long does the joy actually last?
A week, a month.
Very quickly, the reality becomes normal. The new salary is just your salary. And then the boredom sets in. The existential emptiness returns. To cure the boredom, your mind immediately targets a new goal, the next promotion, a bigger house. The pendulum swings back to the pain of wanting.
It's exhausting just thinking about it. And for Schopenhauer, Faust is the ultimate fictional embodiment of this universal will. He is pure, unadulterated striving. He can never be satisfied because the universe itself is fundamentally unsatisfied.
Correct. Schopenhauer saw Faust not as a unique sinner, but as the magnifying glass showing us what human consciousness actually is at its core.
So we've gone deep into the narrative, the tragic history, and the Western philosophy surrounding the story. But I want to pivot now to the most pressing question. If the guy in the red coat isn't real, if there are no magical contracts, what does it actually mean to sell your soul in the real world?
To answer that, we have to strip away all the mythological trappings. We have to discard the bubbling cauldrons, the witches, and the blood contracts. The devil in this story is a metaphor for an internal voice.
It's the voice that asks you to trade your most valuable permanent possession in exchange for something temporary.
Right. But that begs a massive question that I think trips a lot of people up. What is our permanent possession? What actually is a soul if we aren't talking about a glowing, ghostly orb floating inside our chests?
Our sources break this down brilliantly. It can't be your life, because soldiers and parents willingly sacrifice their lives for a cause or a child, meaning the cause is more valuable than life itself.
It can't be freedom because people give up their freedom to care for sick relatives.
It's not money, it's not reputation, it's not beauty. All of these things are entirely subjective. They fluctuate, they decay, they can be lost in a single afternoon due to an accident or an economic crash.
If the devil is a smart negotiator, and he always is, he is not going to ask for something you can lose anyway. He is going to ask for the one thing you possess that has permanent, unalterable value.
To define what that is, our sources take a fascinating turn away from Western literature and dive deep into Eastern philosophy, specifically the Indian philosophical system of Advaita Vedanta.
This is where the concepts get really mind-bending. Advaita Vedanta translates roughly to non-dualism, and it proposes that beneath all the temporary shifting realities of our daily lives, our jobs, our aging bodies, our fleeting emotions, there is only one single permanent reality. And they call this reality Brahman.
And it's important to clarify that Brahman isn't a god sitting on a cloud judging you. It is described using 3 Sanskrit words: Sat Chit Ananda.
Sat means absolute existence or truth. Chit means pure consciousness or awareness. And Ananda means absolute bliss.
Advaita posits that this underlying field of conscious existence is the only thing that is truly permanent in the universe. Everything else, stars, planets, human egos, are just temporary manifestations, like waves rising and falling on a single ocean.
But here's the massive cognitive twist that Advaita introduces. If Brahman is the ultimate reality, how do I know it? How do I study it?
The answer is you can't. You cannot know Brahman in the way you know a math equation or the layout of your house.
And the reason you can't know it is rooted in the structure of perception itself. A fundamental rule of epistemology is that the subject cannot be its own object. The observer cannot observe itself.
The sources provide some incredible analogies to explain this, and they really help me wrap my head around it. Think about your eye. Your eye can look out and see a camera, it can see the sky, it can see a book.
But the one thing an eye can never, ever look directly at is itself. You can look at a reflection in a mirror, but that's just a 2D image made of light bouncing off glass. The eye itself cannot bend its vision backward to see its own pupil directly.
It's the same principle with tools. A beautifully sharpened pair of scissors can cut paper, cloth, hair. It can cut almost anything in the physical world. But the scissors can never cut themselves.
A fingertip can trace the rough texture of a brick wall or feel the coldness of a drop of water, but the tip of your index finger can never reach around and touch its own tip.
So, you cannot know the permanent reality of Brahman as an object of study, because you are that reality. The subject is the object. There is a famous phrase in the Upanishads, Tatvamasi, which translates to, "Thou art that." You are the very thing you are desperately searching for.
It's worth noting that this isn't exclusively an Indian concept. The texts draw a parallel to the Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna developed the concept of sunyata, which is often translated as emptiness, but a better translation might be boundlessness or interbeing.
Nagarjuna argued that ultimate reality is completely empty of independent, separate existence. A tree is not just a tree. It is made of sunlight, rain, soil, and time. Everything is deeply interconnected.
And like Advaita, Buddhism agrees that this ultimate reality exists completely beyond the limits of human language and beyond the artificial divide of subject and object.
Okay, so this brings me to a huge logical roadblock, a question I really struggled with when preparing for this deep dive. If I am the soul, the Advaita concept of Brahman, it seems logically impossible to sell it.
Because you can't sell what you fundamentally are.
Exactly. You can't put your own underlying existence on a marketplace. You can't sell the ocean if you are the water. So the bargain has to be a psychological trick, right? An illusion.
That is the exact right question to ask, and the answer is profound. You don't sell the entity itself because you fundamentally can't. What you sell is the connection to it. What you sell is your awareness of your own nature.
Okay, explain that mechanism. How do you sell the connection?
Think of it like the sun in the sky. The sun is permanent. It is always shining, always generating light. But if a massive, thick layer of dark storm clouds rolls in, you can't see the sun anymore.
The sky goes gray, you might feel cold, and if you forget about the sun, you might believe the darkness is the only reality.
You haven't destroyed the sun. You have simply obscured your connection to its light. When you sell your soul, you are generating those dark clouds. You are actively putting a thick, impenetrable psychological layer over your true identity. You forget that you are connected to the whole, and you start believing that you are an isolated, separate fragment fighting for survival against everyone else.
And this is where the abstract philosophy turns into hard, practical ethics. Because Advaita Vedanta argues that since all consciousness is fundamentally one, since we are all expressions of the same Sat Chidananda, there is no actual fundamental separation between you and me.
Therefore, hurting someone else is not just a moral failing. It is a literal act of self-harm. You are the hand stabbing the leg.
This brings a completely new dimension to the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In Advaita, it's not just a nice societal guideline to keep the peace. It is a description of physical reality. You shouldn't hurt others because they are you.
So what does it mean to make a Faustian bargain in daily life? It means you deliberately build a psychological wall inside your own consciousness. You look at another person and you say, I am completely separate from you. My desires are more important than your well-being. Your pain is not my pain.
And that is exactly what Faust did. When he wanted Gretchen, he built a wall that blocked out her humanity. She became just an object for his gratification. When he wanted his utopia, he built a wall that blocked out the lives of Philemon and Baucis.
Their right to exist was less important than his vision. He severed his connection to the universal whole in order to acquire a temporary, imaginary extra. He traded his profound connection to reality for a cheap, fleeting fantasy. That is the true mechanics of selling your soul.
Which brings us to a very uncomfortable reality check. We've established what selling your soul means psychologically, but does the universe actually care? Is there a real, tangible punishment for this? Or is the idea of moral consequence just a comforting fairy tale we tell ourselves to keep society functioning?
I am so glad we are going here, because let's be real, we all grew up with moralistic stories like Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. In that story, Dorian makes a deal to stay young and beautiful forever, while a hidden portrait of him ages and rots with every sin he commits.
The visual metaphor is that your bad deeds rot your soul, and eventually it catches up to you and destroys you. It's a comforting thought. The bad guys get what's coming to them.
But our sources challenge us to look at the actual historical real world. The real world doesn't often operate like a Victorian morality play.
The sources we are reviewing use some highly provocative modern examples to challenge this idea of cosmic justice. And I want to emphasize that we are just reporting what the text argues here without taking a political side.
Of course.
For instance, the text points to geopolitical figures.
Okay.
It brings up George W. Bush and the initiation of the Iraq War. The author argues that despite making decisions based on faulty intelligence that led to massive historical casualties and the destabilization of an entire region, he currently lives a peaceful, comfortable life on a ranch painting portraits.
The text uses this to argue that the universe doesn't always deliver karmic justice in a visible way.
Or consider the hypothetical corrupt officials mentioned in our sources. The bureaucrats who take kickbacks on massive highway infrastructure projects. They steal millions of dollars meant for the public good. They build mansions. They send their kids to elite universities. They face zero legal consequences because they are protected by the system. And they die peacefully in their beds at age 85, surrounded by their families.
It is a devastating critique of the idea of external justice, and it forces a very provocative question upon the reader. If bad people routinely live comfortable, wealthy, seemingly happy lives, why shouldn't you make a little Faustian bargain of your own?
If you can get away with it, if there is no lightning bolt from heaven, Why shouldn't you compromise your integrity for a promotion or lie to get ahead? Is the punishment actually real?
To grapple with this, we have to turn to another literary giant, the Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky, because Dostoevsky tackled this exact question in his psychological masterpiece, Crime and Punishment.
The protagonist of that novel, Raskolnikov, is a brilliant but impoverished student living in St. Petersburg, and he decides to commit a murder. He kills a cruel elderly pawnbroker.
But crucially, he doesn't just do it in a fit of passionate rage. He does it for deeply rational utilitarian reasons. He convinces himself that the woman is a parasite on society, and that by taking her hoarded money, he can fund his own education and go on to do great things for humanity.
He commits what he believes is the perfect crime. And from a purely legal standpoint, he basically gets away with it. There are no witnesses. The police have no hard evidence.
But the punishment doesn't come from the police. It comes from inside the house. The aftermath of the murder is a masterclass in psychological horror. Raskolnikov's mind completely turns on him.
He's plagued by intense paranoia, physical illness, agonizing guilt, and horrific insomnia. He feels this profound, suffocating isolation from the rest of humanity.
The wall we talked about earlier, it crushes him. The internal torture becomes so absolutely unbearable that he eventually goes to the police station and voluntarily surrenders just to make the internal screaming stop.
Dostoevsky's argument is that the universe doesn't need to punish you from the outside with lightning bolts or jail cells. The punishment is built into the architecture of the human psyche. When you sever your connection to the moral fabric of reality, your own consciousness becomes a hostile environment.
You decay from the inside out. You have to live in the haunted house of your own mind.
But, and this is a very important caveat that the sources note, and I think we have to acknowledge it, modern psychology shows us that Dostoevsky's rule isn't universal. There are individuals like psychopaths, sociopaths, or people with highly compartmentalized minds who can commit horrific acts and genuinely, truly not feel any inner decay.
They don't lose sleep. They don't hear the heartbeat under the floorboards like in an Edgar Allan Poe story. Some people sleep perfectly fine.
Which means we cannot rely on external observation to prove the cost of a Faustian bargain. We can't look at a corrupt politician and definitively say, he must be secretly miserable. He might not be. The only laboratory you have access to is your own mind. You can only know the true cost by observing your own inner life.
You have to run the experiment on yourself. When you make a small, unethical compromise, when you throw a colleague under the bus to look good in a meeting, or when you lie to someone who trusts you for personal gain, what happens inside you?
Does the texture of your sleep change? When you look at yourself in the mirror the next morning, is there a slight flinching? Does your world feel a tiny bit colder, a tiny bit more isolated?
If you feel that subtle internal rot, then Dostoevsky is right for you. If you don't feel it, well, maybe the devil got a bargain.
But we can't just leave this at the individual level. The most chilling part of our deep dive today is when we scale this concept up to the macro level. We have to look at how the Faustian bargain applies not just to one person, but to our entire society.
This is where we bring in a thinker who feels terrifyingly prophetic. Oswald Spengler. In 1918, right at the end of the immense destruction of World War I, Spengler published a massive, highly controversial book called The Decline of the West.
And in this book, Spengler explicitly labeled modern Western civilization as Faustian.
And he wasn't using that as a compliment. Spengler argued that different civilizations throughout history have different core souls or driving philosophies. And he identified the core soul of the West as an infinite, restless desire to conquer the outside world, to push boundaries, to break limits, to master physical reality at all costs.
And you can see exactly what he means. The Faustian spirit is what drove the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, global colonialism, capitalism. It is the drive that says we must chart every inch of the ocean floor. We must split the atom. We must build machines that fly. We must sequence the human genome.
It is an incredible, terrifying engine of outward expansion. It has given us modern medicine and the internet.
But Spengler issued a profound warning. He argued that there is a fatal flaw in the Faustian civilization. By obsessively, constantly breaking limits outward, by pouring all of our energy into mastering the external physical world, the internal system, the spiritual and moral core of this civilization inevitably rots and collapses.
He argued that you cannot infinitely expand outward without eventually hollowing yourself out. You gain the world, but you lose your soul.
Think about when he wrote that, 1918. Over 100 years ago. Look at where we are today. His diagnosis feels more accurate than ever. We are living in the absolute peak of the Faustian civilization. We have AI races where corporations are desperately trying to build artificial superintelligence.
We have billionaires racing each other to build rockets to colonize Mars. We have conquered the external world to an extent Goethe couldn't have even hallucinated in his wildest dreams.
Yet despite all this unprecedented external mastery, look at our internal state. Every major sociological study shows that anxiety, severe depression, and profound loneliness are skyrocketing globally, particularly in the most developed, technologically advanced nations.
We have infinite information and infinite entertainment in our pockets, yet we are facing an epidemic of meaninglessness.
We successfully pushed back the ocean, just like Faust did. We built the shining towers. But we burned down the quiet hut of our own inner peace to do it. We conquered the outside, but we completely emptied the inside. We are a civilization of incredibly powerful, incredibly sad people.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. How do we step off this pendulum? How do we break the contract we've made with our own desires?
It brings us right back to the beginning, to Goethe, sitting in his armchair, blind, at the end of his extraordinary 82-year life. His final words, more light. For centuries, especially in the Faustian West, we have interpreted that mandate externally. We've spent all our energy looking for light on the outside.
We have chased the imaginary extra in new gadgets, in larger bank accounts, in political empires, and in projecting our fantasies onto other people. We keep thinking the next purchase, the next achievement will finally illuminate the darkness and make us feel whole.
But the deep wisdom of the philosophical traditions we've explored today, whether it's the non-dualism of Advaita Vedanta or Goethe's own mature realization at the end of his masterpiece, is that the permanent connection, the actual soul, the true light, is only found on the inside.
When you trade your internal wholeness for an external fantasy, you are making the worst trade in the history of existence.
You are turning yourself into the zombie from Tombad, cursed with a hunger that the gold can never ever satisfy. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over today. A thought that builds directly on Uzak's concept of the imaginary extra, but applies it to the device you might be using to listen to this right now.
This is the part that really gets under your skin.
Think about the architecture of our modern digital economy. Think about your social media feeds, the infinite scroll of TikTok or Instagram, the hyper-targeted advertisements that seem to read your mind. What if this entire digital ecosystem isn't just a neutral tool? What if it is, quite literally, an automated Mephistopheles?
It is an algorithmic entity that studies your specific, highly personal vulnerabilities.
It gathers billions of data points on you. It knows when you feel lonely late at night. It knows what you are insecure about regarding your body or your career. It knows exactly what you covet. And it uses that massive data set to perfectly package your desires into an endless stream of imaginary extras.
It sells you the illusion of connection, the illusion of beauty, the illusion of knowledge, one microtransaction of your attention at a time.
Its entire operational goal, the metric it uses to define success and generate profit, is to ensure that you remain in a constant, agitated state of restless striving. It needs you to always be swiping, always be wanting the next video, the next product. The algorithm is perfectly designed to ensure that you never, ever allow yourself to pause, look inward at the present moment, and say the fatal words that would break its spell. Stop. You are so beautiful.
Let that sit with you the next time you feel the mindless urge to keep scrolling.
Until next time, keep diving deep.